Hello, and welcome to the first episode of The Court with the Esquire Coach for the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. Today, we have an exciting episode for you as we have Anthony Johnson of Renaissance Sports Group here with us today. Anthony has worked in the business of sports, marketing, and entrepreneurship for over 10 years. His professional experiences provides insight at various levels of sports business. His experiences includes negotiating sponsorships with major sports brands, handling the logistics of NCAA events and tournaments, and curating marketing strategies and or social media campaigns for various sports entities. He is also a certified player agent by the National Basketball Players Association. Hello and welcome, Mr. Anthony Johnson.
Thank you. Welcome, welcome. Happy New Year to you as well.
Happy
Thank you
New
for
Year.
having me.
So if you just want to start maybe by telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, to be brief, I'm a proud product of Baltimore City, or Baltimore as we say it when you're from the city. Um, been a licensed agent for about 5 years now. Started Renaissance a year after becoming a licensed agent once I got a little bit more grounding in the industry. I'm a local guy from Baltimore with the University of Maryland, College Park, degree in sports management, got my master's in business as well at Morgan State University. And just been but have been working in the sports industry for about 10, 15 years now, from the corporate side with like universities and logistics to small businesses as far as working with athletes, developing them from a character development perspective, training, exposure type of thing, even hosting our own camps, to eventually being an agent and handling the business side of just the representation, to the NIL realm, which many refer to as the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna into that. So what made you decide to pivot to being an agent?
Excuse me. Great question. I wanted to be an agent going back to high school. I played sports, I had some interest to play collegiately, but I knew I was undersized and I was just realistic about the possibilities of me being a professional athlete playing football. But I always knew I wanted to work in the business of sports in some capacity. Um, I knew I either wanted to be an agent or a some type of C-suite CEO for a sports organization. And the more I found out, just doing some digging about the agent realm, because the information wasn't as readily available back then. There was no ballers, there was no Rich Paul on the cover of the magazine, and all of those other things. It just wasn't as cool and trendy as what it is today. But the more I found out, the more it enticed me, because one, the complexities that's happening, what was happening with our athletes and just going broke and not being represented. Um, and I would say just wanting to also have an impact on our communities from a way that was controllable on my end. And I felt like the agent could really do that because they work for the athletes, but they also are drivers in helping them make key decisions. And just what communal change that could be was something that was key for me.
Yeah, that's great. And you're right, the visibility of agents has become a little bit more, than it was prior, but I still don't think that people really understand what the role of an agent is. So my next question is could you go more in depth into what the actual role of an agent is?
And I think it's evolving. I'll say that. One, the main function of an agent is really to primarily, if you're licensed, like you're talking about a professional agent versus an NIL agent. Let me start there. So if you're a professional agent, you're licensed with the leagues and their unions to negotiate contracts on behalf of the players with those professional teams or organizations, right? That's the main function of an agent. But there are some agencies only do that. They just negotiate those contracts and that's it. We're a boutique agency, but we like to be more full service. So there are a lot of other things that we like to help support from not only from an agent role, but kind of a hybrid of an agent and manager. So whether that's developing camps, combine showcases, just supporting their professional endeavors, to social media content strategy, if they need web design, to even having support from a legal perspective. We have lawyers that we work with. If you're talking about IP, if you're talking about logos and owning your brand and those type of things, agencies tend to be more all encompassing because we want to influence in a positive, have as much say in that process as possible. Hopefully with the best intention of our athletes and clients. Now, when it comes to the NIL agency, it's a little bit different. And the prerequisites to become an NIL agent is not as complex as being a professional licensed sports agent with the leagues. But some of the job functions are similar. And what you're negotiating, you may be negotiating with the collectives, but also supporting them more from a marketing perspective or management to getting the brand deals as well.
Yeah, I think the end of that answer definitely dovetails well to my next question, which is how has NIL changed the agent industry?
I think the positive, I'll tell you the positive and the negative, right? The positive about NIL is that it provides more opportunity and access when you're like a boutique agencies in particular. It gives you more opportunity to prove your value to some of those higher tier, high caliber athletes. And if you're doing good work and good business, it gives you opportunity to retain them as clients professionally too, right? Now, granted, you're not locked in. If you sign with me on NIL, you don't have to sign me professionally, but ultimately, you just want an opportunity a lot of times, right? So it gives us more opportunities to prove our value in which instances you might not necessarily have because people are always trying to get the big agency or they feel like bigger is better when that's not necessarily always the case. And then when it comes to just the negative, it's just that agents already had some stigmas associated with them, right? And I think with NIL, now the ease of becoming or claiming yourself as an NIL agent has just further muddied those waters. I think people aren't all doing good business and they're grouping us all together as it pertains to agents and how they work or function in these spaces. And part of the reason may be because the NIL agents don't have the same repercussions if they do their business wrong. But we're kind of governed by the Players Association and those things. And legally, we can be fined or go to jail for if we're doing some type of malpractices when it comes to and like pro representation. I don't think the NIL agents don't have that same fear or the same responsibility, and I think it's complicated how we're perceived because people group all of us together. They don't just say, "Hey, NIL agents." They say agents a lot of time. So if you say you're an agent, they just group you with the bad activities of the bunch.
Yeah, I think part of that too is because people don't realize like what steps you have to take to be an agent, right? So there's registering with the state, right? Then there is registering with the various players entities. NBA has different rules and different requirements. The NFL has different rules and different requirements. MLB has different rules and different requirements, along with the other sports as well. But in college, because this is all so new, we don't have like any of that yet. So, which leads to like the next thing that I want to bring up, which is a big part of the reason why I asked you to join me today, is that there was recently a clip of a podcast interview where a NIL agent spoke of agents taking 20% commissions on deals. And that led to much debate on social media about whether or not that was predatory or, was okay, because those who are familiar know that the NFL, NBA tend to cap the percentage that agents can take to 3 to 5%. So although 20% is like an industry standard, if you're just talking about like general endorsement deals, maybe shoe deals or something like that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this, and if you think it's reasonable for an NIL agent to take 20%, or what you think a reasonable percentage is.
Yeah. I think that varies. Now, I'll give you an ancient response. I think that answer varies. I will say that. And I also tried to watch the conversation that he was had. I think how it was presented wasn't really the reality of the conversation as far as what his intention and what he was communicating in that dialogue. I think he went to take it a step further and break down a lot of the value that the services that they were going to be providing that has value that could validate a percentage, whether it's 20% or whatever. So I think that context matters when people are analyzing it. But I think a lot of times people don't like the context; they like the conflict and just go with it, right? When it comes to the social media world. Now, what I would say is when it comes to just agent fees, generally speaking, most agents kind of break it down in the NIL landscape. They might have a fee for the collectives versus a fee for the brand deals, per se. Brand deals, both are eat what you kill, but the brand deals are more eat what you kill. In the manner that you're going to essentially acquire those, get those opportunities for your clients. The brand deals can vary anywhere between like 10 to, let's just say, I've seen as high as 30, 35%, but generally 20 is a safe spot, right? For brand deals. Now that's different from like the collective or the revenue sharing deals that's going to be happening going forward. That's what the hot topic was. People thought that he may have been applying 20% for a revenue share or collective deal. Now here's where it gets complicated a little bit. And I think when you're comparing them, it's not directly apples to apples, I would say. One, if you're signing a SRA or an agreement with the NBA or NFL, that contract is very standardized. Like, ain't really too much. You can't change a SRA. You can add addendums or other things, marketing contracts, etc., to that agreement that you're submitting to the leagues. But that SRA that you signed to they send it to the NFL. You ain't changing that language. NFL ain't letting you change that language. So even the amount of work that goes into that, it's just a matter of negotiating percentages and an addendum, right? So that 3 to 5% is on a very well, NFL I think it's only 3%, NBA is 4. It's very standardized as far as that contract language goes. But if you're talking about a conversation that's happening with a revenue share or a union or a collective, it's a lot more effort or energy, I believe, that goes into those negotiations. And it's a lot more freedom or autonomy to alter language, right? So with that alone, it's more work, I believe, or it's likely to be more work in the negotiation. So it could call for a higher percentage than that 3 to 4%. If you're just looking at your services, your knowledge, and how it applies to the effort for that transaction, right? Now, I personally don't think 20% is necessary, but I have seen instances in which you can validate it. That's what I was saying. I think the norm is more in alignment with somewhere between like that 4 to 10% as far as the collective of revenue sharing deals, because the full transparency, it's harder than negotiating the pro deals because those are standardized, but it's also it tends to be less work when you're talking about the collective deals versus the brand deals as far as acquiring them and the negotiation process, especially if you have a high tier, high caliber athlete. So I would say, just to give a range or variance, if you're talking about the collective deals, anywhere between 4 to 10%. But I think an example that the gentleman used on the interview, he validated a higher percentage just off of like, listen, we got that guy, let's say 3 to 4x than what they were initially supposed to get. And if you just do the math of yes, you could be squapping about that 5% versus the 15 to 20, but the difference was so vast, and having that agent or attorney at the table and a multiplier that was like, what are we talking about, right? Um, but just from a general rule of thumb, I would say between 4 to 10% when it comes to like the collectives. And then I would say brand deals is mostly around like 20% is the safe spot for the happy medium there.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important that, people get more information on like what goes into setting those percentages, rather than just, the soundbite I've heard him talk about 20%, but just understanding what is in the deal and how much work the agent may have to do that kind of goes into those different percentages. You spoke a lot about the NFL and NBA and their players associations and how they give you, standardized contracts. Do you think we'll see something like that coming in college sports? I know it's a little more difficult to have that because, we have the conundrum of whether college athletes should be employees, whether they should unionize, and you get your standard contracts for the professional leagues from your unions. But do you see, or maybe even think that there should be some type of entity that standardizes some of these things for agents?
I've seen a lot of people trying to position themselves as players in that respective realm, their organizations that are kind of directly helping athletes to unionize. I think it would be added value. I'll say that. But also, my faith in the NCAA doing it is not extremely high either. Even if they do get it organized or curated, I don't know if we know where their intentions or their actions may have shown. So I don't know how strongly I would feel about them spearheading that initiative, because I know even some things that we've dealt with personally as far as agents, like they had a NCAA regulation directly as it pertains to basketball agents, right? That was a lot of agents didn't agree with that. I'll just say that, and that was spearheaded by the NCAA. So my faith, I think it needs to happen, but I'm not too beating on the table for the NCAA to be the leaders of that endeavor.
Yeah, definitely understand that. So you mentioned revenue sharing. So, and for those who don't know, what he's talking about with that is the house settlement that's pending. And if that's approved, I talked about a house settlement several times on the show. If that is approved, then we will see colleges for the first time being able to engage in revenue sharing with their athletes. How would that change or affect the agent industry from an NIL perspective?
One, I think is going to be if they don't do something to regulate NIL agents, period, it's going to be just more. It's going to be oversaturation. I think um, there has already been like a concerted effort to by a lot of players in the sports sphere to devalue agents, and I'm talking about coaches and trainers to the collectives to NIL marketplaces. Everybody's kind of devalued agents when ultimately they're just trying to serve in those roles as agents themselves. A lot of times, and I think that will just be more of a worst case scenario. One, just being having more agents or pseudo agents in these spaces, so it's going to dilute the space more. Now, just from just a functionality or business perspective, I think it creates some degrees of standardization. Um, but also for those non like the bigger entities, the football, the basketball, and the women's basketball potentially, those other sports, the agents who are working with them, it's also going to be intriguing too. Because then it's like, well, how much interest do you have in the track athlete now that has 1 million followers? Because they aren't generating that much on the revenue sharing model, but for the brand deal, they still presents opportunities. So I think there's going to be some balancing with that. I think, but I do think it might even generate more interest because now with those athletes, those smaller sport athletes, at least there is some form of guaranteed money, right? On the revenue sharing side, in addition to the brand deals where you have a big following. I think when it comes to just the revenue sharing with the bigger sports, I think maybe even the agents may have more flexibility as far as their commissions that they're taking. I could see them maybe taking lesser than. But I think it'll just make the field ultimately just even more competitive than what it already is if they don't put any prerequisites into what it means to become an NIL agent going forward.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like you think some type of regulation or I guess qualifications to be an NIL agent will definitely be in the future. Um,
Yeah, I think so. But it's then the challenge also is like, well, who mandates that?
right.
Because even when you're talking about state regulations, there are a few instances in which somebody's went after, like the states has went after an agent or a pseudo agent for not operating or being registered with the state and those things. So that's going to be the challenge is who mandates those regulations. I wish, honestly, ideally, they would have some. And it's on the pro side too. Even like when it comes to the state, some uniform way that we can pay and be licensed with all the states or something along those lines. And same when it goes to NIL, because those fees add up. But only I honestly believe that only the like professional agents are paying those fees. I don't think the NIL agents are really doing the due diligence and the work, and it's not nobody to really mandate it.
Yeah, I wonder how many of them even realize that there's a fee that they're supposed to pay and that there's a
Yeah.
sports agent act and all of those things. So which is why, I want to do this and put this information out there, which actually leads perfectly to my next question, which is when you have a college athlete and maybe their parents are assisting them, are considering hiring an agent, what are some of the things that they should consider?
First, I would say if they're registered in the respective state that you're doing business in.
Yep.
A lot of times, if parents don't really aren't aware that that's a prerequisite, I would consider that first. Secondly, I would consider what skills that agent they're equipped with to kind of further service your client and what's their intentions or plans with working with your son as a client or daughter as a client. I think a lot of times parents just go with the bigger entity because that's the cool thing and not really looking for alignment and skill sets that's equipped to, support your child and their goals and future endeavors. Um, so I would say register with the state, what's their plan and what's their skill sets. I think those are things that you lead with when you're having these conversations. And I personally will prefer a, an agent who has some type of professional certifications. whether that's certified with a league, NBA, FIBA, NFL. I feel like you're doing business with a higher degree of integrity, and you have something to lose if things don't go right, if things go wrong, as opposed to just an NIL agent who's trying to trying to get put that foot in the water. And if things go wrong with your child, they go into the next situation or the next job profession.
So, what are, maybe three or so questions that an athlete or parent should ask an agent before hiring them?
um, to align with what I said, are you certified in the state? Um, do you have a plan or strategy to how you would support my son or daughter, as it pertains to NIL? Um, and I will also ask them just straightforward: is your plan to represent my child just for NIL or long term? Because a lot of times people play the long term game with NIL. Some people don't, but I think let's be transparent about what it is on the front end, so we can know how to move forward. And that doesn't mean you have to sign with me long term, but it's good to know everybody's intentions.
Definitely. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about like high school NIL, because Maryland is one of the states that allow high school athletes to engage in NIL deals. So I want to know, like, have you done NIL with high school athletes, and if so, what has that experience been like?
So we're in the process of finalizing our first high school signee as it pertains to NIL. I was very apprehensive about it for quite some time. But granted, my perspective might be a little bit different now because revenue sharing is coming into play. But a lot of times when you talk about high school athletes, when you're talking about what the original structure of NIL and how it was supposed to be, a lot of athletes didn't have big followings, wasn't really as invested into social media from a tool, not a toy perspective. And all of that mattered and was a part of like, things that we would take into consideration, just the maturity, understanding of the platforms, a willingness to learn and, so us to support them. But going forward now, we're going to step into that space. But I think it still matters the right type of athlete that we're going after, we're pursuing. We have one that we'll be announcing soon, so you're getting some early insider information, an athlete that we're going to be working with that's going to the University of Maryland, which is my alma mater as well. But we're starting to explore some also more on the basketball side, as well as the football side. So it's something that we haven't done a lot of work in yet. We're just starting in that space. But I will say to your question, just about the lay of the land, agencies are now have already been for a while stepping into the high school landscape earlier to acquire clients from the NIL perspective, talking to sometimes earlier sophomores in high school. So
So what should high school athletes consider as they look for NIL deals?
I think as a high school athlete, you don't have a revenue sharing model, so you should really just focus on just laying up. I feel like NIL is really just an opportunity for you to intern on how to be a professional. So, and I think that is an opportunity for them to just understand business first, understand what it means to build a business, solidify a business, establish an LLC, understand what taxes may look like at an early age, get a financial advisor. All these things are just laying a foundation, right? So I think they should be focused on, if you're in high school, laying a foundation to the business that you're trying to do in your future endeavors, and also just try to just find a groove or strategy into like content creation, so that by the time you are transitioning to the collegiate level and you're getting revenue shares, you'll have had the best of both worlds. You would have had the revenue share, and you would have had a brand that you can get brand deals that a brand actually wants to work with you. I think a lot of times athletes think because you go to a Division I college, you're marketable to a brand. When at that point, you're competing with so many other athletes who may be starters, who may be All Americans, who may be both, who have 20,000 followers on IG. You only got three, right? So I think to proactively build your base and your brand socially, while also laying the foundation for your business and the high school level, would just be how you should approach it going forward. And not putting too much pressure on yourself, but that's just you interning to how to become a pro.
So would you suggest that that it's advisable for a high school athlete to work with an agent? Or at what point would it be advisable for them to work with an
I
agent?
think if you're going to do the NIL work, if you have an agent willing to invest into you, then yes, because obviously the thing we were hot in the ground. These kids have more information and insight and access to information, but still, how many some of these high schoolers parents don't even know about how to properly pay taxes. And the reality of it is, if you get in cash flow coming in, you're gonna owe some tax money. So little stuff like that, or to the point of just like again social media strategy and content. So I like for myself, I have a degree or certification from Georgetown as it pertains to like social media management, marketing. I've done social media for businesses, for the government, etc. That strategy or valuable information that an athlete can have that can help them. I might not be the best TikToker in the world, right? But even as when it comes to just curating the strategy, scheduling the calendar out of content, determining what your data is telling you about the content so you can get more engagement to be more marketable for brands, that's valuable insight and knowledge that we've accrued over years of experience that as a high school athlete, that you should soak it up as a sponge and all right, I'm gonna parlay it, I'm gonna make it relevant to me and my audience to grow my following. That's all.
All right. So I think we're gonna switch gears just slightly a little bit for my last question to you, and that would be, speaking more to people who may want to get into the industry. So my question is, what advice do you have for anyone who may be considering becoming a sports agent?
um What I would say, man, like this be candid. Don't get into the space if you're just trying to sit on the sidelines and be on the court. Um, we get interest from a lot of people. Some are serious, some who aren't. I would come into this space with the expectation to do work. Some of the work is not sexy. A lot of agency work is sometimes it's contingent on doing admin stuff. Is most the biggest characteristic of being an agent in this space that I would advise anyone to really have is tenacity and being tenacious in your pursuits and your goals. And that doesn't require if a lot of times people want to get in this space and they just want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. And if it's not operating and functioning how you see fit, I'm on to the next. So this isn't a position or role for me. Most agents respect tenacity. So if you want to get with an agency, be relentless in following up. And once you get there, don't lose that tenacity because you got the internship and you got the opportunity. Stay tenacious. And I think that, especially when you're talking about building relationships, this is a relationship based space. I got to be tenacious about meeting and building with this family. I have to be tenacious about being present by going to these sporting events because these are all the time consuming. All of that is essential to you just having a quality relationship. It ain't just you sending a FaceTime to an athlete or something along those lines. So I would just say start with tenacity and retain that throughout the entirety of the process until you are where you want to be. That's all.
Well, thank you. I think you've provided a wealth of information for anyone listening to this. So I would like to thank you for joining me on the show and give you an opportunity to tell everyone where they can follow you and how they can connect with you.
Okay. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to connect with you. As me personally, my social is just entrepreneur. It's like entrepreneur, but the first letter is the A. But I really would prefer anybody just to follow Renaissance Sports Group more than anything at REN Sports Group. On most social media platforms, with the exception of LinkedIn, it sounds out, it's spelled out full and full. So, if you have any questions, concerns, or I could be a resource, please reach out. Let's build.
All right, thank you. And this concludes our episode for today. And again, thank you for joining us.